Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to the first of our 3 panel discussions of the conference. This panel discussion will look at promoting inclusion in diverse learning environments by focusing on the area of special or specific needs. I'd like to start with a short introduction to each of our panelists, followed by a very short presentation, and they will then make a short presentation each before we move on to asking the questions. We also have Twitter feeds coming in, and so if anybody wants to send in Twitter feeds, questions through Twitter feeds, we'll also be addressing some of those. So first speaker is Phil Dexter. Okay. Phil Dexter is a teacher development advisor for the British Council UK. Phil has worked for the British Council on English language teaching projects since 1987 in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and advises British Council offices and our partner ministries of education on primary and secondary teacher development projects. Phil has an MA of Education, primary, secondary teacher development projects. That's a real mouthful, Phil. From the University of Newcastle upon Tyne, and a diploma in special needs, special educational needs. Phil's current work includes the production of the new British Council online special education needs teacher development course and the establishment of a global special educational needs support network across the British Council. He has also published Creating an Inclusive Learning Experience for English Language Learners with Specific Needs, based on case studies from around the British Council network, a copy which is on the pen drives that you can get from the British Council stall. Okay. His topic for this evening is Inclusion in the Classroom. Teachers can make a successful difference. Okay. Our second speaker is Mari Delaney. She's an educational psychotherapist, English language and modern foreign languages teacher and trainer. She has worked in the field of special education for many years in mainstream schools, special schools, and secure units. She has been Director of Studies for International House, Course Director for Teacher Training at Pilgrims UK, and has trained teachers from all sectors in many countries for the British Council and through her own company. Her own company called the Learning Harbour. Her main interests are how can we include all pupils in learning, overcoming learning blocks, dealing with challenging behaviour, and supporting staff in dealing with difficult pupils. She's the author of What Can I Do with the Kid Who... and Teaching the Unteachable. She's currently working on a set of online special educational needs resources for the British Council. Okay. Mari's topic for today is, do teachers have to be specialists to students with special educational needs? Many teachers feel unsure and lack confidence when trying to include students with special needs, particularly if they have not been trained in this area. Why is this such a challenge, and how can teachers develop more confidence in the area? Okay. Our third speaker is Farida Raj. She's a remedial educator registered with the Rehabilitation Council of India, the RCI. She completed her post-graduation in special education from Mumbai University and in-service training in the UK. Farida is currently director of the Centre for Special Education, the CSE, in Secunderabad, where she conducts assessments and provides remedial instructions for children with specific learning disabilities. She's also a visiting lecturer at various teacher training colleges, including EFLU. Okay. Farida is the author of Breaking Through, a handbook for parents and teachers of children with specific learning disabilities, which has been translated into Telugu and Hindi. Okay. She has regularly contributed to popular English newspapers, and the theme for Farida's talk is Evolving Challenges. Okay. I'd like to ask Phil to come and speak first.
Hi, everybody. We want to make these speeches quite short because we want the maximum involvement from the floor. I just want to make 1 or 2 points before I get into the kind of main points I want to make. I'm really, really pleased that this session on special educational needs has such a kind of prominent role in the conference and on the first day, because it's certainly something very dear to my heart, and essentially this is for all teachers. You know, we're not talking about specialists, we're talking about things that all teachers can do and ways of thinking about this subject. Just before coming over to Hyderabad, I've just spent 3 days in actually Mumbai, and in that I've been visiting schools, both mainstream schools and specialist schools in Mumbai. So I've got at least a small understanding of all the excellent work that's going on in schools in India in quite different ways and in quite different approaches to inclusion as well. It's really helped me learn a lot. Yeah. Okay. Am I on? Are we on? Yeah, we are. Yeah. Okay. I just want to make 3 or 4 kind of points for you to actually think about, and I hope this will lead to kind of questions, really. And then it'll be followed up. I mean, I'm going to make some actual general points, and that will be followed up from more actually specific points. I think the first point is our terminology, and I think we need to think about whether it's disability or whether we're just talking about language difference. And I think that this is really one of the most important points I want to make. In many cases, it might be what we call sometimes, which I certainly wouldn't use the word of normal, or kind of what's sometimes called neurotypical. I prefer to use the word, the phrase actually neurodiversity. And that essentially what it's about is that, there are just different ways that we learn, and our brains work in different ways. And I think that has to be one of the main starting points. How can we teach in the way our learners learn? And I think that's kind of point 1, really. Yeah. Okay. The second point is we can see here a lot of what might be the issues in terms of neurodiversity and learner differences, and the challenges we have as teachers in kind of reaching learners. Here we're talking about, quote unquote, the average child, and here there's a whole range of issues. Now, there are specific interventions I think that teachers have to make, especially what we're talking about is in the language learning context, and we're talking about challenges across a range of issues in terms of language processing. But that also applies in terms of subject learning as well. But I think we also have to be very careful about labelling and say that, you know, and really isolating learners. This is the dyslexic learner, and this is the learner with ADHD, and this is the learner with who's got Asperger's. Because it's not always clear, and often there are multiple issues as well, and often it's what's actually appropriate for individual learners, but what also is the benefit for all learners in a classroom context. And I think this is really, really important, that yes, specific interventions, but let's be very careful about labelling as well, because that can actually do more harm and kind of isolate as well. Okay, I think it's very important to also, to just lead on to what I've just said, is what I call the visible and the hidden. And in many cases, it's about the hidden. In any classroom, there's probably, you know, we could discuss the numbers, the percentage, but we're talking about a large group in any class who have special needs and may require specific support, but it's not clear what that is. And so I think it's very much about what are the issues that actually benefits all learners, and how can everyone access the curriculum, the syllabus, the lesson, whatever. And just want to finish with posing two kind of models that are very much current in the thinking in special educational needs. One is called the medical model, and the other is called the social model. what the medical model, basically, there's many things we could talk about this, and we might want to explore this more when we're into questions. But the medical model fundamentally focuses on the impairment being the problem, the individual being the problem. The individual doesn't fit in with the rest, with the rest. While the social model is fundamentally a kind of child-centered approach, and actually is about playing to individual strengths and what everyone, whether you're identified with special needs or not, what the strengths are and what you bring to any kind of educational setting. And I think that's, these are quite different approaches. And I think the fundamental approach in principle in terms of, if you like, human rights and kind of learning choice, then it's about focusing on this social model that the structures of society need to change rather than the individual. Okay, that's my bit.
Okay, hi. Following on from what Phil's been talking about, what I'm actually very interested in is the teacher in the mainstream classroom that has been asked to suddenly include everybody and has heard all about these special educational needs that we need to now know about and try to help our students with. Sometimes it can be a bit scary and a bit off-putting because, we think we need special knowledge to actually deal with these children. So I thought we'd start with a little survey, if we can, of everyone in the room. So hopefully you can see these questions. I'll just read it out, and then I'm going to ask you to have show of hands, just from your own experience. So as you can see, the first one says, my experience of interacting with people with special educational needs is A, extensive, B, average, C, minimal. So that's people in general, not students in your classes, but just in your everyday life. So maybe we could have a show of hands for that. Okay, who would say their experience is extensive, a lot of experience of interacting with people with special educational needs? Could you just put up a show of hands? Okay, thank you. And who thinks it's average, that you're... Okay, fine. And who would say minimal? Yes, okay. That's actually very honest of you, and I think, to be honest, it's also quite common that for a lot of us, even in our everyday life, we haven't had much experience of interacting with people who are slightly different or have different needs. And again, that might make us think, we don't want to offend, we don't want to upset, we actually don't know sometimes how to behave. So the second one, when I have to deal with people with special educational needs, so when you have been in that situation, do you feel A, confident, B, not completely confident, but okay, and C, unsure and a little anxious? So can we try that? Who would say A, confident? Okay, a few people. Who would say not completely confident, but okay? Okay, quite a lot of people. And who would say unsure and a little anxious? Yes, quite a lot of people as well. So mostly we seem to have been B and C on that one, which again, in my own experience, just from working with teachers around the world, seems to be fairly, the normal reaction to it, that we kind of would like to know a bit more, we think we might be okay, but some of us are a bit unsure. So the last one, specifically to do with your classrooms, when I have learners with special educational needs in my class, I feel A, confident, B, interested, but don't think I know enough, and C, unsure and a little anxious. So who would say A, confident? Okay, a couple of people. Who would say B, interested, but don't think I know enough? Okay, quite a lot of people, probably why you're here. And C, unsure and a little anxious. Yeah, a few people as well. I mean, so that's actually, again, that's quite interesting. What does interest me is, before we start looking at strategies or before we start looking at the learners, we need to maybe look at our own attitudes and our own prejudices and our own perceptions. Kumar was talking about that this morning, that actually that whole thing about reflecting on what I find difficult, what I find normal in my life, and why I might be challenged by this. That's kind of the beginning before we can even start thinking about what we're going to do with it as teachers. So this is a little, I don't know, some of you might know Winnie the Pooh, hopefully. This is something we use quite a lot with teachers and in classes and with students. This idea that in Winnie the Pooh, you have two people, you have a couple of animals. You have Tigger. Those of you that might know Tigger, Tigger's always optimistic. He's always bouncing around, everything's great, life's wonderful, he sees the best in things. So if Tigger had to teach a class suddenly with students he didn't know much about, students with special educational needs, and he was feeling lack of confidence, Tigger would think, great, what I'll do is I'll look at what's working. I'll notice these children, I'll notice what they need, and I'll notice what I do that works, and if something doesn't work, I'll try to find out why, or find someone who can help me understand it. Eeyore, the donkey, is always pessimistic. Yeah? Eeyore's the sort of donkey that when it's his birthday, says the trouble with birthdays is you only have them once a year. So he's not even happy on his birthday, Eeyore. So Eeyore, unfortunately, is like a lot of us teachers can be about when we're faced with new challenges. You know, we think, I don't know how to deal with these children, I get it wrong, you know, I don't know enough, I'm not a specialist enough, I just tried something there and it obviously didn't work, and, you know, that class didn't go very well, and I didn't know what to say to this student that you know, when they had a problem. So really, I should give up, or should ask someone else to do this for me. What I would ask you to think about when you're dealing with including any sort of children that might be different is that Tigger is actually what we need to be in our jobs as teachers. We need to be able to look at what works, what we know, what we see is happening, and do more of that. Unfortunately, what we often do in education is we find out what doesn't work and we do more of it. So some of the issues that will come up for us as teachers is that often we feel we have no time to do this different thing with these kids. What I would say to you is that we make time for things we think are important. And if we decide that this is important, we'll make time for it. Training, well, obviously you've come here, so you're kind of committed to your training. There probably isn't enough training around, but again, personal development, self-reflection, learning from our own classrooms, as we heard this morning, is equally important. Lack of knowledge. I think that when you're dealing with inclusive classrooms, the model of the teacher knows everything and imparts it to the student has to go out the window to some extent, because really the place you'll learn about how to deal with those kids with special needs is from those kids and possibly from their parents. So we need to go away from that model of we need to know everything and we need to think we can draw out information from the learners. We need to think about learning styles, which I think Farida is going to talk about. Sometimes our learning styles are not reaching these kids. We need to change. Projections, we need to think about what's coming from the children into us. Sometimes the children feel quite helpless and hopeless, and if we're not careful, we end up feeling like that when we're trying to deal with them. We need to change our attitudes, and we need to think about how we're going to measure progress. Because if we've got expectations of progress that involve everyone has to get this mark or that mark, that's going to exclude quite a lot of these learners. We need to maybe look at involving them in their assessment, setting smaller goals, and measuring progress in that way on an ongoing basis, but more collaboratively. So it is quite a challenge for us, but I would also say that including students with special needs is actually just doing good teaching strategies and good practice. And lots of the things that were said this morning, it's not something special that you can't do. You can do it.
Thank you, Mari. Okay. We'll now go on to Farida on evolving challenges.
It's wonderful to be here and facing such a huge audience, and I'm sure you're going to take back a lot from after this panel discussion. Well, we've been talking about special needs, talking about children who have disabilities and they have special needs. With RTE, we need to bring in all children without discrimination on the basis of gender, ethnic, socioeconomic background, or coming in from wherever with any kind of disability. Now, when we look at disabilities, there are some disabilities which are very obvious. And people who deal with them at the schools, the teachers, they are able to perceive their needs and they may try to help them out. But today, I would like to draw your attention to a disability which is not visible. These are children who are smart, intelligent, they work very hard to do well, but they remain underachievers. They are as good as their peers in almost everything except for academics. On the slide you see, there is a boy in a blue t-shirt looking very happy with himself, but the fact is that he is an underachiever and has low self-esteem. These are children who are termed as gray area children, going nowhere children, or falling in the crack children. So what is the matter with them? They have a disability which is invisible. Nobody understands them. Their parents don't really see what is the matter with them. They deprive them of their sports, their games, and watching TV. The teachers perceive them to be lazy or pampered, and the student himself is very confused because he is working very hard but not reaching anywhere. Now, to give you an example, in a class, when the teacher asks a student to read, and he tells the teacher, I cannot read because the words are jumping. This is just to give you a clue what happens. And this child is not able to read, so he remains an underachiever in all subjects. Or he says that I am not able to read because the printed text is going in and out of focus. Or when he is given a dictation of just 2 sentences with 3-letter words, he cannot get them right. Simple words are the P and Q are reversed, B becomes D, the teacher gets angry and she gives a 0 or the paper is got all red marks. So this child goes through life with very low self-esteem. We have to see what can we do. Now that we are doing away with special education, we are talking about inclusive education, we need to have mainstream teachers, class teachers, who are able to identify the problem in these children and also able to help them. According to a survey done by World Bank, the number of children with disabilities in India is substantial and it is likely to grow in future. And it is also a truth that 85% of children have mild disability. It goes to all the disabilities. 85% having mild disability mean that they are going to be in mainstream. So what is it that we are going to do for them? Also, when the government survey shows that of the 200 million children who enroll for primary school, only 141 million stay in school, the rest drop out. Why do they drop out? They drop out because their needs are not met. Their special needs are not met. So the time has come to address this issue and make effort to train teachers, give them training so that they are able to cope with this scenario in regular classroom. In Andhra Pradesh and all over India, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan is doing very good work, conducting teacher training and training of the master trainer. Also, SCRT is conducting training of the master trainers courses, and there are manuals made which will help the teachers to cope with these children. So this is the need of the hour, and we need to look at that.
Thank you, Farida. Okay, we're now going to go on to questions. If you have any questions, please put your hand up. We'll collect a few questions. We also have Twitter feeds, and if we will come to those in the next round of questions. And if you do ask a question, we're going to give you a publication, one from Phil and one from Farida. Okay?
It's not a question, basically, ma'am. The problem is, as ma'am Farida Raj told, the teachers should be put on task. The problem is, I'm teaching in a college in Himachal Pradesh for the last 24 years. I have also edited certain books. I go to different schools and colleges to impart training to teachers. What the problem is with the teachers, of course, when teachers are bent on improving the students, all miracles can happen. It is with the teacher. Suppose, say for example, the time of the class is 10:10, they'll go to the class at 10:50. They don't have time. And secondly, there is inequity also with certain students. These are major issues. We should include such issues as well. As Ma'am Farida told, there should be certain training for teachers as well, which is most important. Rather, this is the integral part of, should be integral part of teaching assignments to the teachers. This is what just I wanted to say.
Thank you for that comment. Can we have questions, please? The panel is going to be around, so if you would like to discuss these things further with them, they will be very, very happy to speak to you one-to-one. There's a gentleman here in the third row. Behind, the next row. Yeah.
Because the theme of this conference is inclusive education. Is it possible to have inclusive education when you have students with differently abled, students with different abilities, in fact, in the classroom? For instance, the kind of context from which I come from University of Hyderabad. We have students of visually challenging students. So when you have them in the mandate of the university is that the students should be with the mainstream. Can a teacher who has no special training, even if there is special training, can a teacher who is trained in special education deal with the students who, has both the kinds of students, both the mainstream students and students with different abilities as well?
Okay.
This is my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have a lady here. Question?
As Farida Raj has said, it's quite easy to identify physically challenged children, but how do we identify this gray area, children with low self-esteem? Do we have any aptitude test or something like that?
Okay, thank you. Question from the right there?
One of the slides very impressively presents the distinction between the tigers and the donkeys, the pessimistic and the optimistic teachers. So the question is to how to have more tigers in the classes. What are some simple tips that make us tigers?
Okay, thank you for that. There's a lady waving to me. I think yeah.
I would like to know what are the interventions that are possible which can raise self-esteem of these children, number one. Number two, with special reference to language learning. What are some of the interventions that you would suggest?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, one more question.
If a person is disabled, suppose is having one leg or lacking one eye, how we can use this as the power? We can use it as a power, and I want one example.
So how can we make this into something positive?
Yeah, it has got a power. We can use it as a power.
Okay, we've got 5 questions. We're just going to look at these questions first, and then we'll have another round in a short while, okay? First question was, how is it possible to have inclusive education when we have students with different abilities and needs in the same class? Yeah, Farida?
Yes.
Yeah, it was if we don't have special training, that was an addition.
People with different abilities or differently abled when they are in the classroom, whether it is easy to handle them. Well, we are talking about those who are mildly handicapped, okay? And as I said, 80 to 85% of people are with mild handicaps or disabilities, and if the teachers are sensitized or are given in-service training, they can very well accommodate them in mainstream classrooms.
Can I just add to that question? I know lots of you probably teach big classes and with all sorts of needs in them, and we're not by any means saying it's easy and it's not a challenge. But in my own experience, I would say it is possible to include students with different needs in your class, but it does require you wanting to, as I said before, not thinking you need to know the answer to everything, that sometimes you get it wrong, but you might notice with the student what helps them. In my experience, a lot of teachers are actually quite frightened of saying to the student, what helps you, or why did that not work for you? And we know we also need to think about, inclusion inclusion is not necessarily always in one place. Sometimes parents want what's best for their child, and it might not be mainstream if it's severe disability. But I think a collaborative approach will help, although it is a challenge. We're not saying it's easy in that way.
I was trying to ask you whether it is possible to have both students of special needs and the mainstream needs in the same class. If that is so, how do you address the needs of the both? And is it not a challenge for the teacher? For instance, when I teach reading comprehension to students, when I plan my lesson, I need to think specially for visually challenged students and do something about it. And even sometimes, if I do that, I am somehow, somewhere excluding them. How do I address this issue? This is my question. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought I'd answered your question. I agree. You're actually that is a difficult situation that you just described. And I think sometimes as teachers, we're always trying to be perfect, and there isn't always a perfect answer. But you've obviously said it yourself, that you try to adapt your material, you try to, probably differentiate in some way with your students, and you probably often feel it's never quite good enough. But if you're doing your best and you are differentiating, if you are trying to adapt your worksheets, and if you are trying to work with the students on what helps them, then I think, you're doing as good as you can. It just doesn't sound to, it probably doesn't feel satisfactory enough to you. That's the hard thing, I think. I understand, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah. I'd just like to add to this, and in some ways this is answering one of the other questions on kind of teacher intervention. It's just one practical example. I think we are going to have some workshops later in the conference as well, which will go into looking at very practical ideas we can use in the classroom. But I just want to pick up one very practical English language teaching activity. And when we're doing text work, often we, as ELT teachers, we love to do jigsaw text work. And so it's about, we mix up the text, and you ask the learners to actually put the text all together. Now, for learners who have real challenges with sequencing, which may be dyslexia, maybe, that is an almost impossible task. And so to ask learners to do that means that they can't do the task. However, those learners may perhaps respond to a text by having a more kind of holistic approach to the text. So they would need some support in kind of the big picture of the task. And so they understand what the task is about, and perhaps they can actually play around with the kind of shape of the jigsaw, and kind of put things together. And so it is about giving very, very simple kind of different kinds of activities. And there is no easy answer, but I think it is about looking at very, very slight alternatives in some cases that might make a huge difference. And I think that's a kind of looking at things optimistically as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm very conscious of time, so I'd like to try and keep the questions and the answers as short as possible. And if you aren't satisfied with the answers, please, again, do come and talk to the panel members after. We're talking about intervention, and that was one of the questions. Would one of the other panelists like to address the question of what are the interventions that we can make, especially in relation to ELT?
Okay. This is about intervention. Low self-esteem. I think it can be dealt with, provide more opportunities to be successful than to be a failure. In our system, we pick on students for their weaknesses. We don't look at their strengths. So if we look at their strengths and we help them to overcome their difficulties, the self-esteem will disappear and the students will become better. It's nothing like success, and they'll be motivated to do better. You can add to it.
Yeah, I'd also say exactly, you know, when you're struggling in class, you need people to look at your strengths, what you're good at as well, and maybe include, if you know they're good at things like drawing or they know there are other subjects, let them do that sometimes to help you even. But I also think self-esteem is maybe, when children are struggling, is acknowledging the struggle. So saying to them, I know you find it difficult, or I understand this is frustrating. Naming the feeling they might be having around it can be very powerful for children that are sinking in class. And it doesn't feel like very much, but it actually means a lot to them to think that someone understands how they actually feel. So, you know, I know you're feeling really bad and you're finding this hard, but I think you can do this, and, you know, have a go at it and then praise them when you notice what they've done.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to go on to the next question, which was question number 2. How do we identify those with lower aptitudes? Is there a test of some kind that we can use? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to identify students who have learning disabilities, there are many tests. Some are conducted by clinical psychologists or special educators, but there also are very simple ones which are teacher-made tests. A teacher who's sensitized to this issue can make her own tests and be able to identify. And once the identification is made, intervention becomes very easy.
And I suppose, yeah, as a teacher, you'll notice if students are, for example, Farida showed you some good examples of students that are struggling with reading, and I think listening to them is really important. If they start, I often ask them, you know, what happens when you look at the page? And if we take the time to try and listen, they might say it's jumping around or it's moving about. Noticing their writing, are they reversing things? Are they mixing things up? Are they having trouble keeping straight lines on the page? More so than you'd expect at the level of their developmental level, their age. But also, I would say, personally, I work a lot with behaviour. Children's behaviour often shows you an unmet need. So the child that's shouting out, that can't sit still, that's being rude maybe, that's not getting started with their work, that never seems to do what you tell them, that could actually be hiding a learning difficulty that they actually can't talk about or don't want to admit to. And if we're not careful, we end up dealing with the behaviour, not looking at the possible learning things. So, you know, I think as a classroom teacher, using your own sort of common sense about what you feel is not quite right with some children, but also realising that they don't always show you in a very straightforward way what the issue is.
I'd just like to add briefly. I mean, if there is some kind of a test that can help you identify, then I imagine that can be very useful. But I am a bit sceptical in kind of using such information. And again, because I think that there's a real danger in kind of labelling in boxing, and I think kind of teachers' intuition is actually very, very important as well. And seeing the learner's strength is this kind of starting point to actually real integration in the classroom.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question was about how can we get more tigers in the class rather than Eeyores. Would you like to start with that, Farida, or Mari, or?
It's my slide, I suppose. Yeah, it's a good question, and I could probably go on for hours about it, but I won't. I think one thing is teachers realise we need to accept we're human beings. We need to accept that we have feelings and that our feelings are important. And if you are supporting each other and your colleagues, it is important to take stock at the end of the day and think, how did the day go and how do I feel? And acknowledge that you know, there might have been some ups and downs. But one good exercise that I always set for teachers is to say at the end of every day, write down 6 highlights of what went right. Because as teachers, we tend to take home the kids we had a problem with, the classes that went wrong, the colleagues we disagreed with. That sort of stays in our mind. So kind of retraining our brains a little bit by every day saying, find the 6 highlights. Because if you find the 6 highlights, you'll be able to give it back to the kids. So if you if you notice someone who was struggling did well today, that was your highlight, you can say that back to them tomorrow if you hadn't said it to them already. So that's one way. I think one way is trying to bring into schools the idea of supporting each other, not being in competition with each other. The worst thing that ever happens in a staff room is when you say, I had a real problem with that class, and your colleague said, oh, they're no problem for me. So we need to try and be able to talk about problems without feeling we're getting blamed and without feeling we're being judged.
And the fifth question we had was, when people have differing abilities, how can we use this as something positive? When people have differing abilities, special needs, specific needs, how can we use these as something positive within the classroom?
It's again looking at their strengths, and also we can help these students with peer tutoring. Yes, Mari, what do you say? Yeah, peer tutoring is very important. Here, this gentleman who said about a visually impaired person, if he's in your class and you are not able to devote so much time to him and you are not a special educator, but then you can always take help of your other students, and peer tutoring really helps. So this is one way of looking at it, and we must always look at the strengths and not the weaknesses. In fact, when we talk about students, we always say, use the strength to get over the weaknesses. So I guess by looking at their strengths, it will make a big difference.
Okay, thank you for that. We're just going to have 2 questions from the Twitter feeds. The first one is, should teachers be trained to deal with specific needs of learners? And what are the ways to identify the learning styles of learners? And this is from Albert. Yes, Mari?
Okay, to be honest, if I had my way, all teachers would have this training in their pre-service training. I think there's, we're often taught lots about the subject and how the curriculum, and we're often not taught how to deal with actual individual needs in the classroom. But as I said, I still think we can, it's a bit like Kumar said this morning, we work under constraints. We can still, our attitude will determine what we make of that. And the thing about learning styles, I suppose, for me, as I say, I often work with challenging behaviour, and one thing I'd often say is how a child misbehaves might tell you something about their learning style. If they're always tapping, if they're always moving around, if they're always falling off their seat, perhaps they're kinesthetic. If they're always daydreaming, looking out the window, doodling on their paper, perhaps they're visual learners. And obviously, if they're always chatting, wanting music on, turning around to talk to people behind them, maybe they're an auditory learner. So there are things that they might be doing in your class that look actually naughty, but could be giving you a sign that their learning style's not being catered to.
All right. Just related to that, there's another Twitter question, and this is specifically for Phil, from someone called AB. Learners learn in different ways. How can we teach them in the way they learn?
Okay. Firstly, I just want to echo actually Mary's point as well, that about embedding it in all teacher training. I think this is so important. Yes, it should be done at pre-service level. If it can be, then it needs to be done at in-service level. And I think all courses should have, should have aspects of this training embedded as part of the course and not necessarily kind of separate. Yeah. As ever, no simple answer to these questions, but I mean, what one approach that I like to take, and it relates very much to kind of learning styles. I mean, I think also that there's a little bit of danger, again, in trying to isolate different learning styles, and this is the visual learner, this is the auditory learner, this is the kinesthetic learner, but we do have preferred styles, and I think it's playing to that. And the way I like to do it is having an activity that would be a multi-sensory approach. So it's one activity where there's a task to be done, but you can actually respond to the task in different ways. And it might be playing a piece of music or something, and then you might respond with either drawing or responding in a kind of text activity or it could be something else that involves a bit of kind of physical movement. So I would call this an attempt, and I can only say attempt, at a kind of inclusive activity, because it's one thing the teacher does, but the learners will respond in different ways, in ways that suits their styles and their learning priorities. No simple answer, though.
Can I also say, I'd also say teach your learners about learning styles. Let them do little tests with them and little activities with them to get them to think about how they learn. You know, bring them into the whole secret of it rather than make lots of extra work only for yourself. Make that a collaborative process. Learners really like it.
Okay, thank you. We're just going to have two very quick questions. We haven't had any questions right from the back because we've sort of been concentrating. There's a gentleman right at the back. Right at the back.
Yeah, what components need to be added to the existing teacher education programs in order to ensure that, teachers handle their heterogeneous classrooms more efficiently?
Sorry, can you just repeat your question?
What components need to be added for the existing teacher education programs in order to ensure that teachers handle their heterogeneous classrooms more efficiently?
Would one of you like to address that immediately?
There is a very good exercise conducted by SCRT, Andhra Pradesh, where for 10 days, the teacher educators are sensitized about different disabilities, the 5 disabilities. So that way, when they go back, they train their teachers, the pre-service teachers. And also, we need to look at the in-service teachers. If you sensitize them about the disabilities, all the disabilities, they are able to do a better job in a heterogeneous classroom, inclusive classroom.
We're going to go on to one final question from the right here, the gentleman there.
What are the possible intervention programs? What are the possible intervention programs to teach, different concepts like, colors, facial expressions, and different kinds of auditory concepts to a visually challenged, especially prescribed in the content of the English language textbooks?
It's a very good question. Yeah.
I have
one moment.
I have one question.
Sorry, we're just going to answer this question first.
Sorry, I think there's a challenge for us in obviously certain concepts in the classroom, and I think that again is where perhaps peer tutoring, peers helping each other can come into it. If there's certain things that we can learn by touch and by feel, that's obviously going to help, more multisensory. But it may well be that we can only make a guess at trying to, help visual learners with things like colours, and that may well be where translation, would be the most obvious way if they have the concept in their own language. But again, as I would say, it's the visually impaired learners that might be able to help us as to what they really need and what would help them best. And we need sometimes to listen to them rather than think we know it all already. That's what I would say. That's where we could learn. Somebody said about disabilities and empowerment. I think we can learn from the learners about, how best they'd like it put to them and what helps them.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, this actually is a very good question, and it's a real challenge, not just to teachers, but it's to textbook writers, it's to materials and producers and writers, etc. Because there is a real problem if we want to take just the issue of visual impairment, that so many materials are so visually focused. And a lot of training is geared to using your PowerPoints and interactive whiteboards or any kind of board and pictures. And if you're talking about everyone's access to the lesson, curriculum, whatever, it's something we have to be aware of. And I can only echo what Mari's just said. I think very much it is about, if we talk about encouraging learner independence and learner choice, it is listening to the learner and learning from that in terms of what we do. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we are running out of time, and I can feel the disappointment emanating and probably a bit of resentment towards me from a lot of people who want to ask questions. But again, I would like to give the speakers a minute each just to conclude the session. The other question, some people have been trying to
Excuse me,
sneak
ma'am.
in.
One last question from...
I'm sorry, we don't have time, but please do come and ask any of the panelists afterwards, okay? So, Phil, would you like to give your final comments?
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief and perhaps take actually less than a minute. I think all I can say is that it's repeating really what we have said. Embedding training in all training programs is absolutely essential, whether it's pre-service, in-service, and clearly not seeing this as a separate area, but seeing it as part of broad teacher training. There are no simple answers, but I do think the answers lie in looking in being optimistic, and lie in doing things in different ways, and thinking about the way you're doing it, and changing what you can change. And I think that's the beginning of a way of changing practice in the classroom. But I don't, I'm under no illusions of how easy that is, especially in large classes of 70 learners and more.
Okay, Mari?
Okay, it's interesting listening to your questions, and I suppose we've set this up a little bit of a panel of experts, and you'll ask us a question and we'll tell you the answer that you'll go away with, and that'll be the answer to you were dying to hear. And what it makes me think is, back to this morning's plenary, that we're really talking here about a paradigm shift. We're talking about really the uncertainty for us as teachers is that what we don't know, how much we don't know about some of our learners, and how under the constraints we're working in, it can be very hard. And as I said, I know it might not sound enough for some of you. It is about attitude, about working with your students, letting them in on the secrets about learning styles, asking them, being prepared to say, I don't know, what do you think would be best here? How would that help you? And supporting each other as colleagues to take a little idea, try it out in practice, and if it doesn't work, not to get upset and, be Eeyore about it, but to say, okay, why didn't that work, and what could I do instead? So I sense it's, we've set this up in a strange way for what I'm saying, because we've set us up as we'll give you the answers, whereas actually my way of working is very much, let's work with the learners and let's work with each other, because there's no perfect answers, but we can collaborate together.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think we have come to the end, and as I said earlier, the challenge, we face many challenges in our multilingual and multi-grade classrooms, and the challenges are identification and intervention as soon as possible. The earlier we catch these students, the better is for them and for the teachers. And also, we look at teacher educators, training of the teacher educators, and also the teacher education. The curriculum needs to be modified to take in the needs of all the students. And compassion. Mari just talked about the attitude of the teachers. Compassion, attitude, if you really want to help, you will find a way to do so. And I conclude with this last slide. This says it all. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, can you put that slide back on, please? Thank you. Okay, it remains for me to thank our panelists very, very much for this very interesting discussion. It seems to have opened up so many questions and a discussion that could carry on for several hours. But thank you very much, Farida Raj, Delaney, and Phil Dexter. We have got some other Twitter questions which we will try and answer on Twitter or on the site. But thank you very much, everyone. There's an announcement from Phil, another Phil.
Thanks. Just one or two quick announcements. A number of you have been asking about the PowerPoint presentations and whether they'll be available. All of the PowerPoint presentations will be uploaded to the Teach English in India Facebook page over the next several days. So anyone who has presented or is presenting or speaking, please make sure that you hand in an electronic version of your PowerPoint presentation to the British Council staff, either in the Speakers Lounge or in the British Council Organisers room on the ground floor. Okay, that's very important. And then they'll gradually be uploaded to the site, and then you can download them to your leisure. That's the first thing. The second thing is just part of the announcement this morning. I missed one of our sponsors, and that's Young India Film, which are also sponsoring the conference. They also have an excellent stand in the room next door, so do go and check that out. They've been a very valuable sponsor for the conference. The third and final announcement, tomorrow we have another panel. It's about language for development, which covers a whole range of issues: the social dimension, the cultural dimension, the economic dimension of how language and languages work. Also, it could look at skills, it can look at citizenship, it can look at marginalized communities. So there's a broad range of topics that will be covered in tomorrow afternoon's panel. So I'd like you to start thinking about potential questions that you might want to think about writing down on a piece of paper overnight, and hand them to me at any point tomorrow before 3:30. And then I'll have some reserved questions from you in advance, which we can use to get the discussion going as well. So do have a think about the kind of things you might want to ask our speakers tomorrow afternoon. That would be extremely helpful in advance. Okay? Sorry, excuse me, I'm choking. In 5 minutes, the coffee shops sessions will start. They're all on the ground floor rooms and in this room. And then at 6:15, we will have the Oxford University Press sponsored debate with Keith Morrow chairing that debate in this room, with Professor Amritavali and Professor Adrian Holliday sitting on opposing sides of a metaphorical fence. So that should prove to be quite interesting. So go to whichever coffee shops take your attention, or have a bit of air and a bit of coffee or whatever. But it would be great to see all of you back in here at 6:15 for the debate, because that should prove to be quite interesting. Thank you very much.
Just one final thing. The panel is going to stay here for about 10 to 15 minutes. So if anyone has questions, I was passed some questions earlier on. So if you would like those answered, please come and join us.